been visiting the Earth for a long time. A transcendental event took place quite recently, in the mid-20th century, that left its mark on alleged diplomatic relations between humans and beings from other worlds. The Pentagon advisor claims that while President Dwight Eisenhower was on vacation in 1954, he held at least 3 meetings with 2 different kinds of alien civilizations, organized by the FBI. Based on information accessed by the Pentagon advisor, the first meeting took place on the night of the 20th of February 1954 at the Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. Good claims that this meeting involved Nordic-looking extraterrestrials, who were blonde and had white skin and blue eyes. They were from the Pleiades star cluster, located in the constellation Taurus. The president, however, was dissatisfied with what these beings were offering, and he rejected drafting an agreement with them. Timothy Good told the BBC that following his fruitless negotiation with the Pleiadians, Eisenhower would meet a different kind of extraterrestrial, known today as the Greys of Zeta Reticuli. These beings offered the transfer of technology, under conditions that were supposedly more favorable, and a treaty was later signed between the 2 parties. Timothy Good is not the only one to discuss this conjectured event, however. In a 1996 press conference, geologist and engineer Phil Schneider announced having participated in the construction of several subterranean bases, where the previously mentioned aliens took up residence. According to Schneider, Eisenhower allowed the Greys of Zeta Reticuli to live in a number of different military bases, in exchange for sophisticated technology. Furthermore, they would be allowed to abduct humans, in order to carry out medical research and experiments. The Greys also agreed they would not ratify treaties with countries other than the United States. Schneider sustains that the Greys worked alongside US technicians during the construction of these subterranean bases. According to many ufologists, however, these beings proved untrustworthy, as they ended up abducting a lot more people than agreed upon, and would progressively alter the pact, until they ultimately began doing whatever they pleased, refusing to abide by any treaty. The case of retired Israeli General Chaim Eshed is also worthy of note. Israel's space security chief for 3 decades, he maintains that extraterrestrials are real, and that governments are aware of this fact. He has also corroborated the existence of an agreement ratified between the US government and certain alien races, in order to collaborate on investigative research and a secret underground base on Mars. Similarly, the famous researcher and writer Frank Hattem discusses the existence of beings that have been ruling the planet for millennia. The powers that dominate us from the shadows seek to weaken and divide us, since they feed off our fear and pain as the source of their power. This is why they trigger artificial wars, sicknesses and false viruses, whilst fomenting disinformation, so that we will not learn about or notice them, thereby allowing them to continue feeding off human slaves. Dr. Michael Salla, on the other hand, worked in US foreign policy and has written several books, in which he discloses extraterrestrial intervention on Earth, and how it has become a prison planet, controlled by a group of negative extraterrestrials and their human representatives, who are committed to generating poverty, sickness and wars. He has also exposed the existence of rival factions that have fought to control humanity's fate, and that of the planet. Yet, he also discusses an alliance of extra-planetary races that want to help us. The testimony of biologist Dan Burish is another case in point. He was witness to a secret pact between the US government and aliens, after being recruited for a secret project called Majestic 12, for which he conducted research on an ET. He also worked in an underground base in Area 51, where he learned that the military hosts ships, and also beings that are not from this planet. While there, he was able to view a copy of the agreement stipulated by Eisenhower and the Greys of Zeta Reticuli. Lieutenant Colonel for the U.S. Army, Philip James Corso, is another whistleblower, disclosing information about the phenomena that have been taking place on our planet for quite some time. He was one of the witnesses present during the Roswell accident that took place on the 2nd of July 1947. As a military official, he received orders to study and protect the remains of a flying saucer. This military officer has disclosed that the ship was a space-time device, from which crew members could easily access several places in the universe. 5 truckloads of materials were taken from the ship to be analyzed and given to companies, like IBM, and Hughes Aircraft among others, for further development. But what surprised him most was seeing the corpses of the ship's extraterrestrial pilots, since they were small humanoids with features similar to those of the Greys. Analogous things can be said of aerospace engineer William Tompkins, who worked for a top-secret group at the Douglas Aircraft Company. Its mission was to design an anti-gravity spaceship using reverse engineering, obtained through extraterrestrials, and funded using black budget. In other words, these are not accounted for before the US Congress. The US Navy requested the design from him in a covert manner, and he has even presented photographs of a UFO landing on a US Navy aircraft carrier, which confirms their cooperation with extraterrestrial races. He also claims that during World War II, Germany was using ET information to manufacture different extraterrestrial vehicles in considerable numbers, most of which were transferred from Germany to Antarctica before the end of the war. Corey Goode, on the other hand, was recruited at the age of 6, thanks to his intuitive abilities, through one of the My Lab programs involving covert military operations. He worked there for more than 20 years. Despite his memories being erased as part of the program, Corey Goode started to remember certain experiences, like when he took part in a meeting with the delegation from Earth, which also involved extraterrestrial representatives from other galaxies and planets. During the event, he was given a transparent tablet, through which images were projected. He also claims to have seen genetic experiments being conducted on human beings and extraterrestrials, and suggests they have been going on for thousands of years. Additionally, he had experiences on the dark side of the moon, where he was able to interact with beings from other galaxies. According to information he has shared, the unseen side of the moon operates as a neutral diplomatic facility that can be accessed by beings of different origins whenever they please. Similarly, Emery Smith is among those who have dared to disclose information regarding these matters. As an assistant surgeon for the US Air Force, he claims to have worked on highly classified programs inside the government's military facilities, right alongside extraterrestrials, who he affirms look like humans and are living among us. His job was to analyze biological tissue of unknown origins. As time passed, he was granted access to more strictly restricted areas, and began performing autopsies on extraterrestrial beings. Smith confirms that in these classified programs, over the course of decades, scientists from many nations have received help from different groups of extraterrestrials, in the study of alien physiology, advanced medical science, and special anti-gravity ships built using reverse engineering. Similarly, the case of William Cooper provides us with details of what was stipulated in the treaty signed between the US government and the Greys. The treaty established that aliens would not interfere in our affairs, nor we in theirs, as well as determining that their presence on Earth would be kept a secret. They would provide the US government with advanced technology, and help with technological training. At the same time, they would be allowed to abduct a limited number of humans periodically, in order to perform medical tests and track our development. As part of the treaty, the alien nation would regularly provide the Majestic 12 group with a list of the humans they had contacted and abducted on a scheduled basis, which would explain why most abducted individuals are US citizens. According to several witnesses who were formerly in the military, Eisenhower and his team did not reach an agreement with the Nordic Pleiadians because the Americans were more interested in obtaining extraterrestrial technology than in getting rid of the Greys or abandoning the nuclear arms race. With regards to the offer to get rid of the Greys, we know that the Pleiadians actually warned the Eisenhower administration that the Greys were a threat to humanity and should be driven out. This did not happen, however. In fact, they continued working with the Greys and other known races, like the Dracos. Meanwhile, many people throughout the world were abducted without their consent, particularly Americans, and this continues to this very day. Indeed, the International Committee of the Red Cross has launched a campaign alerting the public about the upsurge in disappearances during the pandemic. Nonetheless, governments have not resolved the vulnerability of missing persons' families. Instead, they use movement restrictions as justification for having slowed the search. This policy is causing families to experience extreme anxiety, as they do not know where to turn. Disappearances are not merely isolated events. Rather, the varied histories surrounding the disappearance of human beings have origins that go way back. One legend regarding mass disappearances caused by UFOs continues to be considered a true story that took place in August 1915, when the 5th Regiment of Norfolk was abducted on the Gallipoli Peninsula in Turkey by a mysterious flying object camouflaged as a cloud. Several researchers suggest that the 5th Regiment of Norfolk marched towards a peculiar coffee-colored cloud that landed on the terrain. The cloud moved in a very strange way, traveling against the wind, alongside a group of similar clouds. The entire regiment would disappear and its 800 men were lost, snatched from the face of the earth. In the summer of 1915, Europe was committing suicide, in the throes of the most terrifying and atrocious war known to history. As millions of young men were dying on the battlefield, this mysterious cloud approached the 5th Battalion and descended upon its men, literally devouring them. Following this strange event witnessed by the armed forces of Australia and New Zealand, no trace was ever found of the Norfolk Battalion. Disappearances have taken place in different eras, and they include entire families that have inexplicably vanished or were abducted by unidentified flying objects. This phenomenon comprises countless disappearances, and many of them have been recorded by the press. But more surprising is that we have never received answers regarding the whereabouts of the people involved. The historic case of 1858 is one such instance. It took place during the French invasion of Vietnam when 650 Algerian Zouaves disappeared, whilst marching along the plains towards Saigon. Without gunshots or battles, they simply vanished without a trace, and nothing more was ever known of them. Mysteriously, they have never been found. what can be said of the Chinese regiment's mysterious disappearance in 1939, during the Sino-Japanese War? Comprised of 3,000 men, it had been assigned to defend a bridge on the Yangtze River. The next day, their superiors were shocked to find the battalion had disappeared, right along with its officers. All their weapons and several campfires had been left behind, but there was no sign of combat or corpses. They simply vanished into thin air. These perplexing disappearances are inexplicable and far more mysterious than one would believe. It is a proven fact that one person disappears every 3 minutes, leaving no trace on Earth. In this case, we are not referring to disappearances caused by criminals or other similar scenarios. We are talking about disappearances where people get sucked into strange objects traveling via land, sea or air, independent of where they are, whether in the street, in the woods, or while in transit. In January 2008, press services working for the Russian Ministry of Transport reported a loss of communication with the Russian cargo ship called Captain Uskov, that was traveling from Nakodka to Hong Kong. The Russian freighter and its 17 crew members were never found. At the same time, people continue to mysteriously disappear. They vanish, not in the figurative sense, literally, en masse. In fact, the population of Russia decreases by 10,000 per month, as people disappear without anyone knowing where they have gone. This adds up to 120,000 annually, and as soon as a group of people disappears without a trace, various versions of the story emerge, and more often than not, they involve unidentified flying objects. Most of the 120,000 people who go missing are men, and judging by the statistics, the majority will never be found again. These people simply vanish. In the USA, for instance, approximately 600,000 people go missing each year. And although many reappear, the vast majority of them have been abducted. Many disappearances have a connection with the Bermuda Triangle, where airplanes and ships have vanished without a trace. Similarly, mysterious disappearances take place in Alaska, where there have been more than 16,000 disappearances since 1988. More shocking still is the fact that no leads, clues, wreckage or human remains are ever found. It is as if a powerful force makes them inexplicably disappear. Such was the case of an Eskimo tribe whose village counted 2,000 inhabitants. They vanished without a trace in the year 1930. A witness called Arnand Laurent and his 2 children noticed a strange flash of light as it flashed across the skies in Canada. According to these witnesses, the light repeatedly changed shape. At times, it was cylinder-shaped, and then it would morph into a huge ball. Their testimony coincided with that of 2 police officers traveling towards Lake Anjikuni, where the Eskimo village of nearly 2,000 people was located. A hunter named Joe LaBelle was on his way there to trade leather and dried meat. But as he approached the town, he was overcome by its strange silence. No smoke was coming out of the hut's chimneys, and he could not hear the usual barking of sled dogs. As he passed by the lakeshore, the hunter saw their boats and kayaks at berth, and when he entered the village, he found it completely deserted. As he went through the gates, he saw the men's weapons hanging in place, which was very strange considering no Eskimo traveler would ever leave his weapons at home. Inside the homes, food had turned moldy in their pots, hung over fires that had gone out some time ago. A half-mended anorak was laying on one of the cots, and 2 bone needles had been left next to the garment. After he informed the Canadian Mounted Police, a search party was immediately organized to explore the village and the shores of the lake. When they reached the deserted village, the police were able to make 2 frightening discoveries. the Eskimo families had not taken their sled dogs with them, as they were still there, tied to their posts. They were covered in snow and had half-eaten each other to avoid starving to death. Lebel found no human bodies, living or dead, nor did he uncover signs of violence. He was also unable to find any trace of the path the people had taken when abandoning their village. Experts on this case deduce that the light Mr. Laurent and his 2 children saw flashing over the area was potentially a UFO, and this could have been a case of mass abduction. This would coincide with the fact that more than 16,000 disappearances have taken place since 1988, as previously stated. It also relates to the triangular UFO sightings that occurred in Belgium the following year. Just after 5:30 p.m. on the 29th of November 1989, a police patrol in the city of Eupen reported sighting a huge airborne object that was hovering over a field opposite them. According to their report, it was so bright that it lit up the field as if it were a football stadium. A dark triangular object emitted a low humming sound as it hovered above the police car, irradiating it with a bright beam of light. Throughout the whole of that winter, many people reported having seen that very object. And on the night of the 30th of March 1990, an even more remarkable incident occurred. Thousands of witnesses would see a triangular UFO with bright blinking lights in its center, flying at low altitudes. This mysterious object was flying at very low speeds, around 45 kilometers per hour, but it had the capacity to accelerate to incredible speeds. Witnesses categorically claimed that no Air Force plane would have been able to reach this velocity. In fact, the Belgium Air Force sent 2 F-16 planes that night in an attempt to intercept the triangular ships, as they had been sighted on several NATO radar stations. The jet pilots could see them on their screens, and at times, see them with their naked eye. Despite these F-16s being the world's best interceptors, they were rendered useless by one triangular ship, which could not only accelerate to incredible speeds, it could also stop short in mid-air and shift altitude almost instantaneously. At a certain point, the radar stations and surprised eyewitnesses would watch the mysterious object allow itself to free fall some 4,000 feet, more than 1.5 kilometers, in a single second. Moreover, the object moved intelligently, at least in the opinion of the Belgian Air Force's Chief of Operations. Colonel Wilfried de Brouwer would remark, "There was logic in the UFO's movements." Many people suspected that this triangular object was potentially part of a secret US project. In fact, these sightings were covered in the national news, as well as grabbing attention of the press worldwide. All of them described the same triangular object equipped with 3 orange lights and a central red one. On the night of 11 and the 12th of December, another wave of sightings took place, one in the skies of Ernige. Army Colonel André Amand, one witness, was driving to the train station to pick up his son. Amand and his wife noticed 3 bright lights that formed a triangle, with a pulsing red light in the middle. Amand stopped the car to get a better look, and as he did, the triangular ship slowed down as well. He repeated the same process several times, and each time, the ship would slow down with him, before entering a nearby wood, without a sound. Just as he was about to leave, the ship took off at high speed. And Amand would later say that no man-made object could do what he saw that object do that day. On a related note, numerous residents of Liege and Namur reported having seen a triangular ship above their houses. Triangular ships were largely unfamiliar prior to the famous sightings above Belgium. and based on the extremely precise testimonies made by numerous witnesses. These were not mere collective notions of a UFO, that were more usual of a flying saucer shape. The wave of sightings in the skies of Belgium at the end of 1989 and the beginning of the 1990s undoubtedly represents a unique moment in history. These were aliens, forming part of the secret space program SSP, which together with the military abduction program, MyLab, is in charge of admitting and incorporating sufficient human resources for specific scientific or military missions. This special program comprises of and affects the whole of humanity. Its sinister and dangerous objective is to carry out generalized abductions that are monitored and controlled from Earth and off-planet. They interconnect with a variety of underground and underwater bases. Australia's Pine Gap base is a particular point of reference that acts as a hub for other contact bases from which the Lunar Operations Command or LOC can be reached directly, via space portals. Lunar Operations Command is a huge lunar base station, located on the dark side of our satellite, both above and below ground. It is a proven fact that our moon is a hollow, artificial satellite that was created for a specific purpose. It is used as a neutral diplomatic zone for different extraterrestrial species that communicate while there. And it is where they gain access to all those involved in the different projects conducted by the Secret Space Program or SSP and the MIC or Military Industrial Complex. Some extraterrestrial negotiators live at the lunar base station. Yet its more specific mission stems from the fact that most depart from there to carry out certain special tasks inside the solar system, and in some cases, outside of it. To our knowledge, Earth is connected to the Lunar Operations Command through several subterranean bases via a Stargate, and the same is true of the Interplanetary Corporate Conglomerate or ICC and the Secret Space Program, which were created to form contacts and engage in the commerce of high technology and the different biological materials they distribute through human trafficking, where people are traded for use in experiments with other races. We have discussed the Secret Space Program in depth in our video documentary 67. Throughout history, human beings have posed myriad questions that can only be answered observing the sky and studying the firmament. There are questions that many continue to ask themselves in order to understand where we came from, where we are going, and what is the meaning of life. To our knowledge, our origins are not rooted in Earth, like most people believe. Rather, we are beings that came from the stars long ago, thanks to the will and wisdom of the Creator of all things. With the passing of centuries, and according to the texts of the Sumerians and Assyrian Babylonians, the Anunnakian Nibiruans from planet Nibiru or Planet X arrived on Earth and conducted numerous experiments in their laboratories. They arbitrarily took over the Earth, oppressing and enslaving its inhabitants, in order to modify our human genome. Discoveries in the fields of genetics, biology, biochemistry and astrophysics provide evidence that an otherworld intelligence severed or amputated the 12 strands of DNA we initially possessed, and left us with the 2 filaments we now have that are still active. This is how these alien entities and geneticist scientists from the shadows created servile laborers throughout the planet, whilst they disconnected 10 of the 12 DNA strands inside human cells. More striking still is that the Book of Life is encrypted inside these leftover filaments, much like an encyclopedia. And this demonstrates that nothing inside our genome goes to waste. Modern scientists, taking advantage of people's ignorance, use the label junk DNA, as they do not want us to realize how enormously useful DNA actually is, since it hosts valuable information inside our cells, and we can see this in each person's ability to access this information. This enables us to understand that every cell in our body, and the endocrine system in particular, is reflected through the human matrix of DNA. Which means that if our DNA is activated, we will be able to acquire new levels of knowledge because its origins lie in the universe itself. To our knowledge, our DNA was created by extraterrestrial programmers to help us evolve. In fact, these scientific discoveries prove that creation is of an intelligent design, involving all the fundamental processes and structures needed to sustain life and health. So, based on these beneficial properties in our genome, there were Pleiadians and Venusians called Nordic beings, who tried to help us evolve by giving information on how humanity could live without disease, poverty, and death. And this is the case of valiant Thor. And they even offered to design spaceships, and this is what the famous aerospace engineer William Tompkins experienced, as we already mentioned. However, the US government rejected these offers, and they continued to collaborate with the Greys and continued their technology and arms race. Despite this fact, the previously mentioned influence on collective thought. Ultimately, the committee recommended that public opinion be controlled via a program involving espionage and official propaganda designed to discredit the issue. In this way, UFOs became a matter of national security, as the people's interest in reported UFO sightings was creating public hysteria. On the 30th of October 1938, CBS Radio broadcast an Orson Welles adaptation of H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, which generated a wave of hysteria amongst the population. The show became so high profile that it was developed into a musical program, interspersed with bulletins simulating a Martian invasion near the city of Grover's Mill, New Jersey. And although the show was said to be a work of fiction, a huge number of people would tune in, just in time to hear that Earth was being attacked by extraterrestrial invaders from Mars. A state of terror-stricken panic took hold of a portion of the population, and as such, people still believe that all extraterrestrials are warmongering invaders. Another unusual incident took place, again in the United States. In the midst of World War II, on the night of the 24th of February 1942, a globe-like flying object was sighted which, according to the press, was a new Japanese weapon. The Air Force began shooting, but their powerful offensive was of no use, as the strange object appeared to resist all impact for approximately 1 hour, whilst the terrified inhabitants found themselves in the midst of a war zone. When it was over, the Navy Secretary announced that it had been a false alarm, part of a campaign aimed at causing panic amongst the population. This was a clear attempt to sweep under the rug an event so big that it could not be easily hidden. Is it possible they had the specific aim of getting people used to the existence of UFOs and that their job was to advertise the phenomena in order to instill fear in the population? Or are there extraterrestrial interventions like those that left over 30 million people in the dark, as with the famous New York blackout in November 1965? Another fact to mention is that mysterious men in black began appearing in the 1950s. They were very well dressed and wore dark glasses, and although generally courteous and inexpressive, they were also threatening, since they had ample knowledge of the eyewitness's life. The aim was to scare, neutralize and silence anything related to the UFO issue. Although initially believed to be an urban legend, in truth, these individuals would use any means possible to silence witnesses. They wear dark suits, white shirts, hats and dark sunglasses, and would drive around in cars typical of the time. They would confiscate all evidence in order to cover up the facts and use manipulation or memory-altering techniques. As a last resort, they would eliminate the witness by orchestrating an accident. These strange men in black would appear out of nowhere, and, obviously, no one knows who they actually were or if they were agents working for the shadow government, on a mission to frighten all those with evidence linked to the sighting of extraterrestrial ships. In any case, the sole reality is that these mysterious UFO sightings remain a mystery. Indeed, this is why they were called Men in Black. They would silence UFO witnesses and appear at certain times to dismantle UFO-based evidence brought forward by any number of eyewitnesses. It is also strange that these unusual figures emerged from the shadows precisely during the same years the Blue Book was being compiled. With the passing of time, anyone with evidence about UFOs and their crews came to be considered crazy, paranoid and elusive, regardless of the proof they had verifying their existence. The facts show that no extraterrestrial invasion has taken place. The sole truth is that anyone discussing evidence and solid research ends up being discredited and ridiculed. This is the case of prestigious contactees of our time who are branded as disruptive, idealistic individuals who suffer from hallucinations and end up being persecuted, mocked and reviled. Nonetheless, countless testimonies have been given over the years, including contactees who are physicians, astrophysicists, aerospace engineers, inventors, scientists, entrepreneurs and political and religious leaders, who have had the courage to face reproach from the shadow government that operates via its puppet governments in charge of discrediting the evidence. Such is the case of Canada's former defense minister, who claims that different extraterrestrial races are living amongst the population and have been collaborating with the US government for a long time. The president of Kalmykia is another case in point. This small republic was formed after the disintegration of the USSR, and it is now part of the Federation of Russia. He is a billionaire, a Buddhist and director of the International Chess Federation, and he recognizes that he has had contact with aliens. Furthermore, in the 1970s, then Prime Minister of the Caribbean island of Grenada, Sir Eric Gairy, claimed that UFOs were real and that extraterrestrials were visiting us. In order to raise public awareness, he urged the UN to create an international agency that would acknowledge and seriously investigate the issue. Nonetheless, Sir Eric Gairy would come up against the skepticism produced by his ideas. I know that flying saucers exist because I saw one 3 years ago. UN diplomats are going to think I am crazy for saying this. But I am convinced that people from outer space are studying us and that many live among us, as Earthlings. After making these pronouncements, the Prime Minister was strangely forced to resign from his post. And the United States coincidentally invaded the small Caribbean island. Renowned US astrophysicist Carl Sagan, who authored the celebrated book, Cosmos, believed that life is not a condition unique to Earth. Rather, he thought of the universe as brimming over with life. In fact, he wrote that we are all made of stardust and share a secret, cosmic, irrevocable brotherhood with the world in which we find ourselves and that surrounds us. The case of celebrated scientist Wernher von Braun is also worthy of note. In addition to discovering that the moon is hollow and vibrates like a bell when rockets or missiles were sent there, he also issued warnings about Project Bluebeam. This project is linked to the false threat of alien invasion on Earth in order to dominate humanity, which has led us to build space weapons based on the inexistent need for defense. The experience of Italian researcher Narciso Genovese, a student and associate of the eminent scientist Guglielmo Marconi, is another case in point. He formed part of a group of 98 scientists involved in the Columbus expedition. In addition to studying alternative and atomic energies, they also made contact with beings from Mars. Later, the entire group would travel to the Red Planet. Equally surprising is the case of Salvador Villanueva Medina from Mexico, who also lived through an incredible experience when, thanks to his humble nature, he traveled to the planet Venus by invitation of a group of small Venusian men. There is also the case of George Adamski, who was one of the most famous contactees ever. He presented countless UFO photographs taken in the 1940s. He was the first to relay his experiences publicly, recounting how, in the California desert in 1952, he engaged in communication with a being from the planet Venus, who gave him a message urging the termination of all nuclear weapons to avoid destruction of the planet. Despite him being faithful to his story until his death and having given numerous conferences about the issue, many scientists tried to discredit him. Another famous researcher, Enrique del Castillo, recounts that in 1973, whilst standing at the edge of a lake, he heard a noise. The place lit up for a fraction of a second. As he watched two huge ships appear in the sky, two beings would then descend and approach him. Despite being afraid, he explains how he heard a voice asking him to stay calm, before he was taken by the hand and invited to come into their ship. These beings communicated with him telepathically. He later underwent a process by which his body was cleaned. Both individuals had blonde hair, light eyes and a delicate nose and mouth. These tall people were beings from the Pleiades and they would share incredible knowledge with him over the course of several years, warning him about the problems threatening the planet. Similarly, there is the case of US inventor and aviator George Van Tassel, who has had several extraterrestrial contacts in California's Mojave Desert. According to his account, in August 1953, he sighted a ship that remained suspended 3 meters above his head. Extraterrestrials from Venus would invite Van Tassel to enter their spaceship via an anti-gravity beam. While visiting the ship, Van Tassel received instructions on how to build a machine that would rejuvenate human cells using natural energy found in the atmosphere. It was a device they called the Integratron. Van Tassel would finance the construction of the Integratron, organizing UFO space conventions for 23 years, which thousands attended. Moreover, he was invited to speak at numerous universities throughout the country, lecturing on a new science. He wrote 6 books on the knowledge he received during his off-planet experiences with extraterrestrials. However, in January 1978, he announced the device was 90% finished and that he was going to try it himself. But 3 months later, he died in suspicious circumstances, apparently of a heart attack. Because Van Tassel was healthy at the time and he did not suffer any warning signs of a possible heart attack. After his death, all of his documents and plans were stolen. There is also the case of US physicist Bob Lazar, who confirms that he worked for a restricted sector of the Area 51 secret base in the Nevada desert, which is dedicated to the study of reverse engineering extraterrestrial ships. In 1989, he entered a hangar where he saw 9 flying discs of extraterrestrial origins and the bodies of several non-human beings. During interviews, he has explained how the government was trying to decipher the technology used in these ships. He even went inside one of them and everything he saw inside was of extraterrestrial origin. Despite the many details he shared with the press, he was later discredited. And although no one believed him, over time, the data he provided has proven to be accurate. Within this context, we can also cite the famed Serbian scientist Nikola Tesla, who discovered zero-point energy and teleportation. He also published an article entitled Talking with the Planets, where he confirms having detected radio signals from other worlds. There is also the case of the famous singer John Lennon, who claimed to have witnessed a UFO sighting in Manhattan, New York in 1974. His account describes a very quiet object that made no noise whilst moving slowly from side to side. The white lights along its perimeter blinked on and off like normal bulbs, and it had a red light on top. Inspired by his sighting, John Lennon actually drew a picture of the UFO while sketching ideas for the cover of his album Walls and Bridges. In this sketch, the flying saucer he spotted over New York City bears the letters UFOER. He even mentions it in one of his songs, yet he did not discuss the incident again, for fear of being ridiculed by the establishment and the press of the day. That would not be his only sighting, however. He told a friend that on another occasion, some very powerful lights entered his room. He then saw 4 slim figures who proceeded to nudge him towards a tunnel of light. They showed him his life, as if it were a film. Then, they gave him a strange metal ball that was smooth, heavy and egg-shaped, but which he later got rid of. More striking still is that the celebrated singer was later assassinated. Like many other writers, astronauts and military personnel involved in UFO issues that enshroud unrevealed mysteries and strange disappearances. On a related note, US actor and comedian Jackie Gleason, one of the most popular stars of early television, was a friend of President Richard Nixon, with whom he shared an experience that could be the storyline for a science fiction novel. Apart from his artistic side, Gleason had another, more hidden interest. He was a great UFO enthusiast and he owned a huge library filled with books dedicated to research on this subject, which were donated to the University of Miami Library after his death. He would play golf with friend Richard Nixon and share his interest in UFOs. In fact, during a trip to Florida to help with a charity event the actor was hosting, Nixon decided to show his friend solid evidence supporting the many speculative theories in the UFO research books. During an interview with Esquire magazine, Gleason's second wife revealed that he had told her that his friend, the president, had shown him extraterrestrial bodies. According to his second wife's accounts, Gleason came home late on the night of the 19th of February 1973, and she asked him where he had been. She was surprised to see how pinched and pale her husband's face was and thought that something serious had happened. He told her that he had been to the Homestead Air Reserve Base. There, he had seen alien cadavers that were just over 1.5 meters high. They were bald and had disproportionately large ears. Gleason was very shocked by what he had seen, and believed the bodies had come from a ship that must have crashed not far from there. Richard Nixon was known as a UFO enthusiast. He always wanted to learn about the existence of extraterrestrial cadavers, and to know if it was certain that the military was truly implicated in this matter. Nixon gave his friend and aide Jackie Gleason special permission to visit the secret base in Florida. Gleason recounted that several armed soldiers escorted him to a solitary building inside the enormous base, and what he saw there left him amazed. The embalmed bodies of 4 small humanoid men lay on sheet metal. They were 70 centimeters tall, and had small heads with big ears. When he arrived home, despite being shaken by these impressions, he told his wife what he had seen, making her swear to keep it a secret. And although this is an open secret, he always refused to talk about it. Then, in 1987, he would take that secret to his grave. Nixon was not the only president with a connection to extraterrestrial issues, however. His successor to the Oval Office, Jimmy Carter, acknowledged having sighted an unidentified flying object in 1969, when he was running for governor of Georgia. Carter described the event to the National Enquirer in 1976. "I am convinced that UFOs exist, because I've seen one," he cites. "It was very peculiar looking. There were about 20 of us who saw it. It was the darndest thing I have ever seen. It was big, it was bright, it changed colors. And it was about the size of the moon. It was in view for about 10 minutes. None of us could imagine what it was. I am convinced that UFOs exist because I've seen one." During the electoral campaign that would lead him to the White House, he announced his intentions. "If I become president, I'll make every piece of information this country has about UFO sightings available to the public and scientists." To our knowledge, however, once he became president, he forgot about his promise and distanced himself from disclosure, citing defense implications as the reason behind his decision. These were not the only White House occupants who had experiences with UFOs. US President Ronald Reagan, for instance, witnessed an unidentified flying object during his term as governor of California. While traveling, the Republican leader spotted a strange luminous craft from the airplane window. It moved towards and away from the plane at very high speeds, before suddenly disappearing some time later. This experience left its mark on Reagan, and in several official speeches, he alluded to potential alien warfare. A number of years earlier, John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev had contact with beings from space. These extraterrestrials are said to have intervened to resolve the global Cuban crisis in 1963. The then US president and the Soviet leader had a disagreement regarding the installation of Soviet missiles on the island of Cuba, which prompted the US to threaten intervention, even with the use of nuclear weapons. Despite this fact, President Kennedy and Russian Premier Khrushchev are known to have been visited by extraterrestrials, and thanks to their resourcefulness, Moscow and Washington made a pact to avoid atomic war. Kennedy's encounter took place on March 1963, at Edwards Air Force Base in California. A flying saucer landed, and two beings from other worlds descended. The next day, he would have a lengthy conversation with them. They agreed upon the deal he would make, to circumvent devastating nuclear war. What most concerns extraterrestrials who want to help humanity is to prevent the destruction caused by nuclear warfare. And that is why they often find themselves having to deactivate nuclear missiles stored in various military bases. Captain David Schindele provides an account of what took place at the Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota, home to an intercontinental US missile. As he told his chain of command, he and others sighted UFOs while they watched the inexplicable shutdown of missiles. Despite this fact, they were ordered to keep quiet for the rest of their lives about what they had seen. Similarly, famed UFO researcher Stephen Bassett has confirmed that several unidentified objects easily controlled nuclear systems and have deactivated our nuclear weapons on multiple occasions. Bassett is one of the first to mention extraterrestrial interest in the threat of human military activity. But others have also addressed the same issue. In 2008, Bob Jacobs, former lieutenant of the US Air Force, made a shocking announcement about a beam of light that illuminated a nuclear warhead during missile testing in 1967. He would recount the incident during a CNN interview with the recently deceased Larry King. In 2010, a huge cylinder-shaped UFO was sighted over the Francis E. Warren Air Force Base in Cheyenne, in the state of Wyoming. This coincided with the deactivation of 50 nuclear missiles, whilst communication systems were simultaneously interrupted. Perhaps the serious potential risks involved prompted former U.S. Senator Harry Reid to mention numerous cases in which military personnel working in nuclear facilities reported seeing UFOs on site at the end of 2020. These objects' direct interference disabled launching systems, which resulted in a security crisis. In addition to the huge dangers we face due to the recklessness of governments that place the planet at risk of extinction, one of the most dramatic cases of extraterrestrial contact involves U.S. President Dwight Eisenhower's first-hand experience in 1954 at Edwards Air Force Base in South Carolina. There, he met with the extraterrestrial race known as the Nordics. They offered to give him a great deal of knowledge, in exchange for getting rid of the Greys and eliminating nuclear armament. But he refused the proposition. Later, he made a pact with the Grey race, so that they could abduct human beings, and use them for a variety of genetic experiments, in exchange for providing the United States of America with avant-garde military technology. He would ultimately sign a secret treaty with them at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. This particular event has had a huge effect on humanity, which we will discuss in depth later. It is also very striking that Pope John XXIII had several physical encounters with extraterrestrial beings as well, one of which was very unique and well documented. It took place at the Pope's summer residence at Castel Gandolfo in 1961, 2 years before his death. One of his attendees would recount details of the July evening in 1961. He states, "As we were walking through the garden, we spotted a ship overhead. It was oval-shaped and its intermittent lights were blue and amber-colored. We are referring to a flying object that flew over the heads of the Roman pontiff and his assistant before it landed on the lawn of the Pope's residence, on the southernmost side of the garden. After the craft hovered for a little while, it then smoothly landed in the garden. A strange being would emerge. Although very human-looking, he was surrounded by a golden light, and he had very long ears. Both the Pope and his assistant got down on their knees, without really understanding what they were seeing. All they knew was that this being was not from this world, and that it had to be a celestial event. After their prayer, they were very surprised to see that the strange man from the stars was still there, which proved they were not seeing a vision. The Holy Father immediately got up, and walked towards the mysterious stellar being. They then had a conversation for about 15 to 20 minutes. Then, the cosmonaut turned around and returned to his ship, and without another word, took off into space. According to the assistant, the Pope never talked to him again about this experience. Yet, often, when the Holy Father went out into the garden, the assistant was certain there were UFOs in the area, since he would observe the presence of intermittent lights, which for him confirmed that the Supreme Pontiff had other contacts with beings from the stars. Some years earlier, in the 1950s, according to the testimony of a highly qualified witness, Pope Pius XII also had a related experience. A report written by Cardinal Tedeschini describes the occasion. He cites that the Supreme Pontiff appeared to be very troubled and excited. "I had never seen him like that before," and he confirmed the same. "Yesterday," he said, "I saw a prodigy that has made a great impression on me. It was the 30th of October 1950. and I was taking my usual walk in the Vatican gardens, reading and studying some documents, when I was surprised by a phenomenon unlike any I have ever seen. The sun was still quite high, and it appeared to be surrounded by a luminous ring that made it impossible to stare at it at length without discomfort. The object moved in a circular motion, going from left to right, and vice versa. You could see movement inside, as if people were coming and going. I tried several times to see the globe again, in similar weather conditions, but had no such luck. It was no use, I could not see it anymore. On another note, Japanese Princess Kaoru Nakamaru has made contact with extraterrestrial beings through spiritual practices. They told her about the Earth's entry into the rings of the Sun Alcyon, explaining its photonic energy, including the changes it causes, and how we can prepare for them. There is also the experience of Japan's First Lady, Miyuki Hatoyama, wife of Japanese Prime Minister Yukio Hatoyama, who served from 2009 to 2010. In her book Most Bizarre Things I Encountered, she describes having traveled to Venus in a UFO. 66-year-old Miyuki claims her experience happened many years ago. Similarly, Prince Hans Adam II, Liechtenstein's head of state, has thought for decades that extraterrestrials regularly visit the Earth. Despite their countless articles, the national and international media have ignored the fact that Hans Adam II, Liechtenstein's head of state, has funded international UFO research for decades, fostering close ties with individuals like US entrepreneur and UFO researcher, Robert Bigelow. To our knowledge, this discreet prince has believed in UFOs and extraterrestrials for some time, but he has never made the details public. The only thing we know is that Hans Adam saw a UFO in the castle gardens when he was a little boy. The flying object disappeared behind the trees, before soaring away towards Switzerland. Ample evidence surrounds the experience of Swiss contactee Edward Billy Meyer, and news of his close encounters with beings from the Pleiades and other Pleiadian peoples have circled the globe thanks to countless photographs. Although Billy Meyer continues to be one of the greatest controversies of the global UFO community, and his stories have been discredited, however, many of his claims are supported by expert scientists, who confirm that we are dealing with authentic photographs and video footage that is unmistakably real. Humanity has been denied